You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
I believe we have Dan Kish, who's the Vice President of Policy at the Institute for Energy Research. Dan, it's great to have you back. We've missed you, and we know you've been working very hard, though.
Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Well, Dan, it's always a pleasure. And, I was just saying some nice words about you, but deservedly so, because I know you've spent so many years working either, on the Hill or out and about in the country on the issues of natural resources and energy, and you've had you've had good experiences and bad experience dealing with all the different issues, but you have such a vast amount of knowledge to be able to handle the types of questions and things that we discuss in the program, and so that's why we love to bring you on here. But I'm introducing to the audience today the idea that we have a great story here. We have actual solutions to problems here in the United States, and unlike us continually discussing Obamacare and going on and on and on about all these things, we could start just changing the story back to energy and what's working in energy, the amount of jobs that are being created in certain parts of our country, the towns that are stemming up from nothing, really. And it's a great story, Dan. And I know you agree, but you and I agree. But does this administration share the same philosophy? And if they share part of the philosophy, where are they missing?
Yeah, well, they don't share the. I think they share the same view that it would be nice to have these jobs, but like so many things the administration does, the disconnect between actions and reactions and trying to understand the way history has worked and economics works and everything else just seems to escape them. And it certainly is the case for energy. I mean, they are committing us to consumers and the taxpayers to literally billions and tens of billions of dollars in additional costs, some that'll show up on our bill and some that'll show up on our tax bill, for forms of energy that simply aren't ready for prime time. And yet they insist on forcing into the system at a time when, in the absence of any kind of government involvement, we've got the most historic increase in energy production that we've ever had in the United States. As a matter of fact, not because the government isn't involved, specifically because the government isn't involved, and I'm talking about the shale oil and gas revolutions that have made the United States the number one producer of natural gas in the world, and that this year will make the United States probably surpass, we've already done Russia, but probably surpass also Saudi Arabia in terms of liquid fuels production. That includes biofuels, ethanol, that sort of thing. But anyhow, the story's great. We've got the resource. We're creating jobs that pay much more than the average wage job in the United States, and bringing people to a higher standard of living, and yet the administration turns its back on that and pours tax money down the same rat holes.
It's amazing. I was watching C-SPAN pretty much all day today. I got tired of the healthcare hearing and I switched to one of the other C-SPAN channels, and they actually had some pretty interesting coverage on. They were talking about Cushing, Oklahoma, and a whole mess of other energy type things. And it was interesting because we've been battling back and forth, and even with you, we've discussed numerous times the Keystone Pipeline and things like that. And there are existing pipelines that I guess they're trying to expand to make up for that, because they're doing their best not to waste the opportunity of shared relationship with what's, the story that's going on up in Canada. And we all believe that instead of having this all go to China, keep it here where it belongs. And let me just add to this. We're always concerned about national security. We're always concerned with, having to deal with gaining or obtaining energy resources from the Middle East, and of course, what happens to the money that we send to the Middle East in exchange for oil and products. And when you become at least North American independent, and where you produce so much that we're exporting all over the world, you change the dynamics around the world. And I think that's as important as even just the economic potential of the story here.
Well, it's extraordinarily important, and the two are intertwined, actually, Brett. The economic power of the United States holds the key to our national security as well. I mean, obviously, if we're doing well economically, it means people have money to invest in advancing everything, technology, adding infrastructure, doing all the other things that make us a stronger nation. We can invest in things, really invest in things, as opposed to what the government calls investment, which is basically transfer payments. And it makes us stronger as a unit. It makes us grow. It allows us to grow. And therefore, that enhances our security position. And when you add the fact that the economic growth is occurring as a consequence of the domestic production of oil, which reduces our deficit of trade imbalance, and means that money is being invested here instead of going abroad and transferring that money, all of it works together to better our position. And the amazing thing is that people have complained about this for years when it was seen as the only solution they could see is, hydrogen cars or solar-powered cars or you name it. Now that we've actually discovered that we've got huge resource supplies right here at home and we have yet to tap them, all of a sudden you see less and less of this discussion about the security component. But it's real. There's only a few things on Earth, and the number one is energy that countries will literally go to war for and have gone to war consistently for, because it means a difference between a country's people suffering or prospering. And it's that easy. And the great thing about it is that North America has the resources necessary for us to lessen the temperature, drop the temperature on these problems around the world, and benefit ourselves and our neighbors at the same time.
That's absolutely right, and well said. I'm looking at something on your website, the Institute for Energy Research, and folks out there, if you go to instituteforenergyresearch.org, you could see all this on there, and it's a breakdown of tax subsidies, and this is incredible. Subsidies by sector: oil, gas, and coal, $1.69 billion; nuclear, $2.6 billion; renewables, $27 billion. Energy conservation, $13.95 billion. Multi-use, $8.68 billion. So we have spent an extraordinary amount of money on renewables, and the problem here is, like, all these solar companies that are going bankrupt, and I see another one just filed, I believe, in either September or just happened, and it's $100 million here, a $500 million there, $1 billion there. And here's the bottom line, though. We had a couple of years ago the fight in Congress where we almost shut the government down then because we couldn't figure out where to cut another $1 billion. You remember? It was literally $1.2 billion they couldn't come up with, and so they were fighting over that. Well, we could have taken away the money that we threw away on bankrupt solar companies, and that was more than a couple $1 billion. I mean, the point here is we're subsidizing things that on their own can't be sustained because the model doesn't work yet. and maybe we're not ready for it. And so it's one thing to do research and development on trying to advance technology, but it's another trying to keep businesses alive that just can't be sustained. And that's, I think, the direction that this administration has been going. And I think they're either way too early or they're completely off course.
Well, judging by what's now beginning to happen in other countries, Brett, who were leading us in terms of these sorts of policies, I wouldn't consider it leading us off the cliff, basically. What we've seen, whether it's Spain or increasingly in the UK, Germany, where they pay 3 times what we pay for electricity. Think about your residential bill being triple what it is. Think about industries who have been spared this by the government, but who are now beginning to wonder whether, well, wait a minute, how long can this be sustained? We get a much lower rate of payment for electricity than residential people who vote do. How long can we expect ourselves to be in business here before the politicians turn on us and begin to... This is happening throughout Europe. And it's simple thermodynamics. At the end of the day, even though you may not have to pay for the wind or the sun, the magic boxes that convert them into energy and the type of energy they produce, which is the type of energy that you can't depend upon, places us in a situation where we're degrading our amazing multi-trillion-dollar investment in our electrical infrastructure, and we're committing taxpayers who, as you correctly point out, we're already borrowing huge amounts of money to pay for the things that we thought were paramount importance, and now we're beginning to pour more and more, make bigger and bigger commitments, long-term commitments to this, and somebody's going to have to pay the piper. And I think a lot of us look at it and say, how much longer can we begin? Can we continue to make bad decisions before the day comes when the piper has to be paid? And the day is coming. Day's coming.
Well, it sure is. Now, that was my segue to what's a very important story, and I know it's focused on New Jersey where I live, but this is an important story for all over, and that's right on the top there, you have a story on New Jersey offshore wind projects reveals true cost to taxpayer. And, this is something that's been going on for quite some time, and you have developers and, of course, environmentalists and a lot of people who have a stake in this to make money, and so they're looking forward to the hundreds of millions of dollars that will be placed in subsidies by the government to build out this infrastructure and these wind projects. But the rest of us, those who have businesses, those who get a bill each month from a utility company and have to pay for this, we fear that our prices are going to go up if this project and projects similar to this are actually implemented. And I know you guys have looked at this at great length, but are we correct in feeling like our rates are going to go up?
Yeah, it's inevitable that they're going to go up. When you're used to paying a certain amount for electricity, and all of a sudden the new type of electricity that is being forced into the system, or is being attempted to be forced into the system, is going to be that much more expensive, the curve shifts on your electrical costs. And, of course, the more you put in of these sources, the more that curve shifts. And then there's something else that a lot of people just forget about, and that's that, or don't know, and that's that these sources operate when they want to, which means that it's sort of like forcing people to buy 2 automobiles, even though they only need one, because they make you buy an automobile that only runs when it feels like it, and therefore you have to have a backup. And the costs associated with that backup, the insurance, the gasoline, you name it, the payments for the car, those are added to the cost as well. So you're building two systems instead of one. And I know that people think that they should be enamored of wind power or solar power or these things, but what the people who are benefiting themselves economically, and believe me, they are benefiting enormously because the subsidies are enormous, are not telling people is that these are much more expensive than the other forms of energy. And the politicians, you would think that the leaders and the politicians would at least share this information with people. And the good thing about it in New Jersey, to be honest with you, is that the Board of Public Utilities has been straight up playing this and saying, wait a minute, this pencils out to be much, much more expensive than any kind of electricity that we've got, and we just can't commit all of our consumers to pay these extra costs unless we can do a better job of getting those costs down.
Yeah, and I have a few questions on this because to help educate our audience. The first is, when you go solar, to build out the infrastructure, not including the backups, but just the solar. The wind generators themselves, all these tall things with these big propellers that we see. How do they compare in price to, say, the building of a coal plant?
Well, to put it in perspective, it's the EPA has now banned the construction of coal plants, so it's immaterial. Because
that's a good point.
There is no cost for a coal plant, even though we still generate our cheapest power from those existing coal plants that do it. But let me put it in terms of something you can build.
Sure.
The most efficient type of natural gas plant is a combined cycle natural gas plant, and the cost of electricity from an offshore wind facility is 3.4 times more expensive than that produced by natural gas. And you don't have to pay for the fuel for the wind, so it sounds good. But according to the analysis done in conjunction with trying to get a permit approval for this project,
wow.
Those are the prices related to what you're going to end up paying.
So then, so you're paying 3.4 times the price, but then you have to have backup systems in place because the wind's not always going to work, and to my knowledge, you can't store wind energy, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so when no wind, you have to have a backup, period. When these backup systems aren't continually running, because they cycle on and off as you have wind and as you don't wind, doesn't that cause more wear and tear than just having a facility that's just operating?
Absolutely, not just that, but interestingly enough, remember the guiding principle of this administration is carbon dioxide reduction uber alles, and that seems to be the media's approach too. The fact of the matter is, a machine is always better operating and most efficiently operating at a constant speed. So if the thing is running nonstop, you get the best efficiencies. You also get the least carbon dioxide emissions and the least pollutants, the actual pollutants as opposed to carbon dioxide. And so what it means is that you may end up actually by having a combination of the two, one that needs to be backed up by the other, you may be operating a plant that ultimately puts out more carbon dioxide and more pollutants operating intermittently than if that plant were a more efficient plant that could run nonstop.
Wow.
How you like that?
And that's a huge thing too. I got to tell you I will have to be replaying that little segment there because that's I haven't heard that on a lot of our networks that we watch here.
No, but you're not going to hear that. Well, see, it's kind of immaterial if the game is money at the end of the day, and it's just an excuse to be able to have government intervention in a market that otherwise is functioning fine. And again, justification for whatever it is. I mean, you got more people running around with putting white hats on their heads in Washington, D.C., and pretty much all the state capitals in the U.S. looking for money for their clients than I've ever seen. Everybody's morally self-righteous about this. Gee, we're going to save this, we're going to save that. All you have to do is buy my product or insist that other people buy my product. And that's the game right now. It's crony capitalism. It's crony capitalism hiding behind environmental causes. The anti-groups are more than happy to go along with it because they get, there's synergies here. Costs go up, people use less.
Yes, and it's an interesting story because I feel like this is one area where I think we stand with the unions. The unions want jobs, they want good jobs, and of course the energy story as it grows creates those types of jobs. So I think we got to play the same game. Anyway, Dan, we're actually almost at the end of the program here, and it's been great to have you, and thank you for all the valuable information. I'm going to just plug your website one more time. That's the instituteforenergyresearch.org. This is Dan Kish, who's a Senior Vice President of Policy. And Dan, I just want to leave you with this. I think that energy, especially natural gas, oil fracking in this country and in Canada and even in Mexico, could do such wonderful things for all three nations and really for the rest of the world that should be the story of this century. It should be the American century based on reinvigorating energy and growing our economy, growing jobs, getting people off social systems, and doing something positive for a change. Anyway, again, Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brett.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon, Dan. Take it easy.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. Well, folks, great stuff from Dan as always.